everyone, it's Pearson, and I'm looking forward to exploring digital identity and purpose of educational professionals with you this week. This week is focused on the role of educators in the digital space, from having an active online presence, building personal learning network, to contributing knowledge and content online. Digital identity is truly quite the conundrum for me, and maybe it is for you too. It's complex, multifaceted, and the readings this week provide an excellent framework to be both fascinated by as well as perhaps laid a foundation for some dissonance and some dissent. Like many of you, I'm still learning, listening, and evolving my knowledge and perspective of, of technology and higher education. The more time I spend on social media and in the research, the more my perspective evolves. I'm looking forward to that continued evolution. I mention that to note that this is where I'm sitting now. And while my current disposition is the inspiration for this presentation, I imagine that the consistent and fast flux of technology and emerging research will inspire a new perspective sooner than I can anticipate. This week's readings explore digital identity and provide some definitions for what that is and what it includes. The definitions provided root digital identity in personal and professional self presentation, combined with what you are posting and what others have posted about you. It's rooted and focused on content. It also introduces concepts such as reputation, relationship building, environment, approach, branding, systems, risk, discrimination, whiteness, leadership, and provides models that you can experiment and implement with. Wow, that's a lot to digest, and there's still so much more coming to the table. As mentioned by several of the authors this week, the research on digital identity is limited, and I think this unfortunate limit paralyzes my consumption and adaptation of future concepts such as digital leadership, engagement, strategy, evaluation, and even greater understanding of current issues. Digital identity's limitations force me to take a meaningful and necessary pause when I explore these additional concepts. Digital identity provides a really good foundation. It really does. But I'm looking forward to a more solid foundation, one where I don't feel like I'm seesawing between perspectives and research. I'm looking forward to future research that could potentially explore this concept for users who have spent more formative years on the internet and using technology, as well as entry level and mid level professionals in higher education. In case you guessed it, that's research that applies to me. The research that does exist is primarily focused on senior level professionals and students, leaving out a distinct population of millennial users. This is where I fall. I'm not an undergraduate student and I'm not a senior level professional. So, where do I go for my exploration? Part 2 of this week's blog inquires about how then do we define and take ownership of our approach to digital identity. For me, digital identity is a concept in need of deconstructing. Alquist and Golden set the foundation for doing this really well, and it's my hope that future research will continue to provide some deconstructed scholarship. Similar to Golden in considering digital leadership and digital identity, I often ponder, consider, and fear discrimination and career risk. So, how do I define and take ownership of my approach? Is by asking others to take ownership of their perspective. In deconstructing digital identity, I'm positioned that I don't really think I have a digital identity. I will pause here and say, I'm an avid user of social media, specifically Twitter. My colleagues and friends can tell you that I often saw or have a tweet about that. And I consider myself a person whose brain runs like a Twitter thread. My thoughts are threaded, and when someone says something that I agree with, I'll verbally shout retweet. So, yes, it's very much part of my identity, but it's not my identity. It is intersectional and radicalized, but it's not blended. My approach and audiences can be, and likely are, blended, but as you explore your approach, it's important to be cognizant of this difference. My identity is what it is, it's not what I post. What I post or present online is only a piece, part, or portion of what I choose to share. I would implore others to see those posts, pieces, parts, and portions as just that. What others have posted about me is more about their digital perception and perspective. While those things become a part of my online portfolio, they do not or they should not define my identity. I'm not defined by what is cultivated by others. As I mentioned in my introductory video, I've had some unique experiences online. As you all are working on your educator digital identity and purpose project, something I shared in my project last year was how my digital identity, by that definition, includes things that I don't let define me. So why allow the definition to say that it can? My social media presence significantly altered during my senior year at the University of Mississippi. It is a huge aspect of my campaign to become the university's homecoming queen. While the social media platforms were instrumental to my success, they also became outlets for bullies and racist trolls to attempt to belittle me and my victory. Their presence became even more aggressive as I spearheaded the removal of the racist title of Colonel Reb as the top tier male personality election title. From YouTube videos about the obese Ole Miss homecoming queen to hateful speech, social media was a scary place for a short time. However, after some inspiration from a controversial basketball player, I realized that while social media was a platform for them to spew their hate, I could also make sure that I magnified what I and many other young black leaders at predominantly and historically white institutions were experiencing. While I never responded directly, I retweeted almost every hateful thing directed at me. It was my way of showcasing that hate still existed while also controlling my narrative. I provide this example to say that their videos, articles, and speech say more about them than they do about me. So I challenge our research and our scholarship to revisit our language and refocus on who we are describing. As we continue exploring digital identity, we have the ability to not only shift our language but also the narrative. When we are discussing personal and professional identity online, one could reconstruct that what we're actually discussing is not our digital identity, but rather our digital audience and their digital perspective. When thinking about our personal and professional approaches and how our digital identity is shaped by those, a reframe of those concepts would be to consider those terms to describe audiences and not people's identities. Marwick and Boyd have influenced my reconstruction of this narrative. They note that audience describes how a communicative medium mediates a relationship between content producers and receivers. Their article begins by noting that we present ourselves differently based off who we are talking to and where the conversation takes place. Social contexts like a job interview, trivia night at a bar, or even dinner with a partner may differ in our norms and expectations. The same goes for socializing online. Marwick and Boyd take us on a journey that centers the audience and how the audience is imagined and constructed by the individual in order to present themselves appropriately. Their description of their audience reminds us of the immeasurable capacity that exists on online social networks, but also introduces us to how we are conscious of the audience. Our consciousness of our audience is more heightened on spaces such as LinkedIn and dating sites. Our audience is simple employers and potential partners. The platform defines that for us. Sites like Facebook and Twitter have more complex audiences. So, what is audience and how do we define it? How do we determine who they are? One might think that a simple answer is our friends or who follows us, but Marbrick and Boyd exclaim that this is imprecise. Given the ways people consume and spread tweets, it's virtually impossible for Twitter users to account for their potential audience. The same holds true for Facebook. So we need to have and develop tools to consider who our imagined audience might be. Using Marwick and Boyd's methodology, I constructed an audience audit that I hope is helpful in allowing you and other social media users to reconsider digital identity and digital audience. This audit can be reconstructed multiple times for various platforms. Visualizing your audience in this way will help you and other users determine who their audience is, invoked, broadcast, networked, and how their audience's perceptions might contribute to your digital portfolio and what you choose to post and contribute online. The audit utilizes Marwick and Boyd's concept that approach acknowledges multiplicity, but rather than creating entirely separate, discrete audiences through those multiple identities or platforms or accounts. Users address multiple audiences through a single account, conscious of potential overlap among these audiences, which flattens multiple audiences into one. They refer to this concept as context collapse. I'm looking forward to reading what your audience audit revealed. Mardwick and Boyd also provided additional insights that deconstruct digital identity and reconstruct our language. Introducing concepts such as impression management and interesting and valid sentiments on authenticity, these contributions, in addition to consideration of our audiences, all contribute to our digital portfolio and what exists online, while reminding us that they're still just parts, portions, and pieces. While I hold my deconstruction and reconstruction perspectives on digital identity, one of my favorite ways to conceptualize these things, whether it's by identity or by audience, is the Dolly Parton challenge. Made famous by, yes, Dolly Parton. In this post, Dolly Parton displays how we choose to represent ourselves in various platforms. Construct your own Dolly Parton challenge and have a little fun exploring your digital identity or tailoring to your audience. Thank you so much for listening. Looking forward to seeing you online.